Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Please give us one moment. We're going to give people a little bit more time to sign on, and we're going to get the PowerPoint set up for you. All right, thank you for joining us for our December National TA call. I just want to get us started with a few logistics and a recording notice. You will be able to participate using the questions pane. There will also be specific times for questions where, if you can see in the image in the slideshow, there's an option to raise your hand, and we'll just call on you and give you a chance to be unmuted. Other than that, you're going to be automatically muted by the organizers for the session. And I do want to read the standard recording notice before I hit record, just to give you an idea of the policy and what's going on with our recording. So the American Institutes for Research allows for the recording of audio, visuals, participants, and other information sent, verbalized, or utilized during business-related meetings. By joining a meeting, you automatically consent to such recordings. Any participant who prefers to participate via audio only should disable their video camera so only their audio will be captured. Video and/or audio recordings of any AIR session shall not be transmitted to an external third party without permission. And you won't have video today access, and we'll be mostly controlling your muting, but it's still good to keep in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and hit record, and we'll begin the meeting. All right. So I would now like to introduce Greg Kaur and turn it over to Greg Kaur, the Director of the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division.
Thank you, Blythe. And I want to thank everyone for joining this month's National TA call. We know that you have busy schedules and appreciate you setting aside some time to participate in these calls. Looks like we've got a big group today, over 300 folks. So thanks again. This afternoon, we have 4 topics related to the State Performance Plan and Annual Performance Report. Angela Tanner-Dean and Christine Pilgrim are 2 lead Associate Division Directors for this process, will be presenting today. I want to acknowledge Jennifer Wolfsheimer, the facilitator for our data implementation team, for her work preparing today's presentation, although she won't be able to actually be on this call. I mentioned we have 4 topics. The first one is the federal fiscal year 2018 indicator analysis rollout. And then next, we'll be giving you an overview of the optional template for indicators B17, C11, that's the state systemic improvement plan. Third, we'll be addressing outstanding FY 2019 SPP APR questions. And then we'll wrap it up with a highlight of the new SPP APR package, that's the 2020 package, and provide you some answers to some of the questions that have come in. We have a very full agenda today, but we'll try to save time for questions at the end. And as Blythe said, please feel free to put your questions in the question box as we go through today's presentation. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Angela Tanner-Dean. Angela?
Thanks so much, Greg, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, we would like to kick off the call by highlighting 2 recently released SPP APR resources. First up is the FFY 2018 Indicator Analysis Documents. Over the past 4 to 6 months, under the direction of OSEP staff members Mito Solomon and Becca Smith, several of our TA centers examined the data reported under each SPP APR indicator for every state and entity. The results of those data analyses were then formatted into indicator-specific chapters, and the chapters are now available to the public on the IDEA website. OSEP appreciates the support of our TA centers on this product, and we hope that this resource sparks meaningful discussion and is helpful to states in your continued efforts to improve outcomes for children with disabilities and their families. Next, we would like to highlight the FFY 2019 optional SSIP template. Next slide, please. The SSIP optional template is available for use and can be found on the IDEA website as well. OSEP developed this template in an effort to reduce state burden by streamlining the information states report in indicators B17 and C11. The template aligns with the measurement table and meets 508 requirements. The fields within the template do have character limits, and we recognize in order to use the templates, there might be some states that will have to remove content that was previously reported. We do appreciate how important it is for states to communicate this key information with their stakeholders and share information about the important work that is happening in this space. We do remind you that even if this is not captured in what you report to the department, any supplemental or additional information that you would like to share with your stakeholders can be shared outside of the APR reporting tool. For example, states may want to consider providing additional information on their websites. Next slide, please. We want to clarify that states who choose to use this optional template, as well as states that might use their own format, will be expected to upload their indicator B17 C11 report as an attachment in the SPP APR reporting tool by April 1st, 2021. Next slide, please. In summary, we would encourage you to use the template, but whatever format you choose, what is uploaded as an attachment into the APR reporting tool must be 508 compliant. For the FFY 2019 submission, just want to reiterate one more time, that the due date is April 1st, on or before April 1st, 2021. And then in the April 1st, 2021 submission, states must include SIMR data and describe the implementation and evaluation of critical activities consistent with the measurement table. States are not required to provide FFY 2020 through FFY 2025 targets in the April 1st, 2021 submission. Next slide, please. And finally, states should follow the guidance on reporting the impact of COVID-19 that was provided in the SPP APR package for all indicators. For your reference, we've outlined those instructions on this slide. Including this information in your April 1st, 2021 submission will be particularly important for Part B states that use statewide assessment data for their SIMR, because as we know, the administration of statewide assessment was waived, and also will be important for Part C states that were unable to collect complete or valid and reliable early childhood outcomes data for those states that use that data for their SIMRs. Next slide, please. So I am going to get ready to turn it over to Christine. If you have any specific questions or need clarification on anything that I covered about the indicator analysis or the SSIP template, you can go ahead and enter that into the question field. I'll be monitoring that field while Christine talks. And then as Greg and Blythe both said, we will try to have questions at the end.
Thanks, Angela. Good.
Christine, before you start, someone just asked for slide 10 again. So maybe we could just really quickly put that up for a second before we move on. Blythe, can you just go back one slide?
Thank you.
This information is what is in the instructions for all of the SPP APR indicators in terms of what OSEP would expect to see if there has been an impact from COVID on the collection of your data in terms of completeness, validity, or reliability. Okay, Christine, now. It's your turn.
Thank you so much, Angela. Good afternoon, everyone. So now we wanted to shift slightly to talking through some of the questions we've been receiving specific to the FFY 2019 submission of indicators B17 and C11, so the SSIP. Greg referenced earlier, we have about 4 sections of this presentation. For the next few slides, I'll be honing in specifically on the FFY 19 submission of the SSIP, and then moving into questions we've been getting related to the new package, which will cover FFYs 20 through 25. Blythe, could you go to the next slide, please? So let's start with OSEP's expectations for the FFY 2019 submission due on April 1, 2021. OSEP expects that state submissions would include the required information that is consistent with the measurement table. And they're linked here for you in the slide when they're posted. As noted on the previous slide, we really want to remind you to refer to that measurement language for all of the requirements for this indicator. As you've already heard from Angela a few slides ago, our optional template is consistent with the information that's required, so certainly utilizing that tool would be of value to you if you're concerned about our expectations for the submission. Next slide, please. But in thinking about this FFY 2019 submission that's going to be coming in April for B17 and C11, we have to acknowledge the impact of COVID. Angela just had a slide previously, which we were asked to show again, and you'll see it a few more times in this presentation just to reinforce the importance of this information. So as states are wondering how we're going to consider the impact of COVID when we analyze the SSIP submissions, as we noted in the instructions, and this goes across any indicator, not just for B17 and C11, any indicator in which data collection was specifically impacted by COVID, states must include a narrative for that indicator, providing information regarding the impact on data completeness, validity, and reliability, an explanation of how COVID impacted your ability to collect the indicator data, and any steps taken to mitigate the impact of COVID on the data collection. So these instructions not only cover any impact to your data collection across indicators for part B1 through 16 or for part C1 through 10, but also in thinking about your B17 and C11 submissions. And as Angela referenced earlier, this is of critical importance for OSEP to have a true and accurate picture of what your state's context was as you were sort of grappling with the challenges of the pandemic and still trying to meet requirements to collect and report data to the department. Next slide, please. We know that states will have data across a number of indicators that have been impacted by COVID. Previous slide and one earlier when Angela was presenting, provide those reminders about what OSEP wants states to report under the applicable indicators regarding the impact of COVID. As I noted before, same applies to B17 and C11. And we've said this back in the October TA call as well, we don't want states to just sort of speak to this impact in the introduction of the SPP APR, but also making sure you put it under the indicators that were impacted. That is of critical importance. We also would expect that if you experienced slippage in a specific indicator, so not only as it relates to B17 and C11, but any other indicators in the SPP APR, that you would speak to the impact of COVID on the slippage in your data, and you would include those in the reasons for slippage in your narrative. We recognize that for Part B programs, as Angela mentioned, all states received waivers for administering statewide assessments in 1920 school year. So if your SIMR was measured using statewide assessments, then obviously you would not have SIMR data to report. However, you would be reporting on the activities that you were able to implement prior to the pandemic and report on the impact of COVID on the implementation of your SSIP activities. Just one other thing I wanted to add about the statewide assessments piece. So stepping away from B17 and C11 for just 2 seconds, under indicator B3, where states would typically be reporting on participation and proficiency on statewide assessments. Obviously, states don't have data to report on that indicator because of the waivers, but you're still going to have to submit that indicator in the reporting tool. And for the handful of states that have outstanding required actions tied to public reporting, you're also going to need to report on the status of that. So we just don't want you to forget those pieces when it's time to submit next year. We also recognize that for Part C programs, collecting outcomes data likely proved problematic during the pandemic. So in those cases, you would also be providing information within your SSIP, tying it back to what we've asked for and laid out in the SPP APR instructions and throughout this slide deck, sort of the impact on the collection and the reporting and steps you took to mitigate the issues, address the issues and mitigate them moving forward. Next slide, please. There have also been some questions around whether OSEP intends to use B17 and C11 in 2021 determinations. To date, OSEP has not included these indicators in the determination process outside of a failure to submit the indicator or all the components of the indicator as required by the measurement table. In those very specific cases, it affects the score in the data rubric, which does feed into the compliance portion of the RDA matrix, but to date, that has been the only impact in those 2 very specific cases. OSEP does not anticipate changing our practice for making determinations for 2021. And as you know, we would typically signal to the field well in advance prior to a change in the way we make determinations. Next slide, please. So moving on to sort of the questions we've been receiving quite a bit as it relates to the new package for FFY 20 through 25. I will say that sort of addressing some of these very high level questions now is just a part of our sort of our thinking around providing universal technical assistance to states preparing for the new package. So this is just one avenue with which we will get information to you. Obviously, we're also thinking about some other universal TA documents, et cetera, to support ongoing questions that we're getting or new questions as they come in. So we recognize that many of you are gearing up for some pretty intensive work with your stakeholder groups to start this process and thinking about target setting for the new package. Probably our most asked question right now around the new package is setting targets and whether there are targets that OSEP would approve even if they did not show improvement over baseline. So as noted on the slide, generally targets are not approvable if the end target does not show improvement over baseline. However, there are specific instances where we have allowed an end target to not show improvement over baseline, and they're noted here on this slide. It is OSEP's long-standing position that in the case of natural environments, resolution sessions, and mediations, the targets should not drive a specific outcome. More specifically, in the case of natural environments, an IFSP team, including the parent, must make service setting decisions based on individual child needs, not on meeting a target. Similarly, targets should not influence agreements made within mediation and resolution sessions. Additionally, regarding participation rates for children with IEPs on statewide assessments, ESEA requires that states annually measure the achievement of not less than 95% of students with disabilities who are enrolled in public schools. So to align with that requirement, when reporting on participation data under indicator 3A, a state's end target may be set at 95%, even though there is no improvement over baseline. Finally, as you're aware, there's enhanced language that was included in the SPP APR instructions that elevates parent voice. And I know we had a slide about it back in October during our TA call, rolling out the new package. States must describe the stakeholder input process regarding target setting, analyzing data, developing improvement strategies, and evaluating progress. So we would expect to see that within that description that as states are working with their stakeholders, that they're engaging with them around all of those areas, but also specifically with setting targets for FFYs 20 through 25. Next slide, please. For states that use sampling under the appropriate indicators, you may be wondering if a new sampling plan is required with the FFY 20 APR due February 2022. So as noted in the SPP APR instructions, if a state has decided that its current sampling plan is still appropriate and only needs a change in the years of use, the state can provide an assurance in its APR submission to that effect. If a state wants to develop a new sampling plan or revise the current plan beyond just a change in years, the state will need to submit the sampling plan for approval to OSEP. And further information surrounding that and what's required in a sampling plan is included in the SPP APR instructions, which are posted on the IDEA website. Next slide, please. So touching back on B17 and C11 now, but in the context of the new package, so thinking about when the SSIP is due February 1 of 2022, we've had some questions regarding whether states can continue with their state identified measurable result, or SIMR, that they identified in the current package, so what you're now working on, or if states are going to have to change their SIMR with the new package. States may do either. Whether states keep their current SIMR focus or change their SIMR in the new package, so that's with the February 1, 2022 submission, all states must set targets for FFYs 2020 through 2025. in that submission in February 1 of 2022. If states change their SIMR, they must provide baseline data in addition to the targets for the full 20 through 2025 period. We would also expect states to provide details regarding the analyses that were conducted and the stakeholder engagement that led to the decision to change the SIMR. Additionally, we would expect states to report on the improvement activities that were part of the current SSIP that will be leveraged to improve the new focus area, as well as identify any new system components or evidence-based practices. Finally, as noted on the slide, states will not be required to get approval from OSEP to change the SIMR. States are strongly encouraged to discuss changes to their SSIP to B17 and C11 with their OSEP state lead, as well as work with their TA providers, who I know are stand well poised to support you in this space. If OSEP has any questions or concerns about a state's new or revised SIMR that is reported in that 2022 submission, it's going to be documented in OSEP response, and we will address it with states during the SPP APR clarification period. Next slide, please. So B6, we've got a number of questions about whether we expect the target for B6C to be above or below baseline. OSEP expects that most children would attend a regular early childhood program and receive the majority of special education and related services in the regular early childhood program, and thus the targets should decrease over time. We've also started recently to get some very nuanced questions regarding target setting for 6C when considering very small N sizes, privacy issues, and the potential for baseline to already be an extremely low percentage. So what would OSEP expect in terms of that decrease? It is extremely helpful for us to continue to receive these questions from the field. Certainly, if you have some in this space, put them in the chat. We may not be able to respond to them now. Actually, I'm confident we will not be able to, but it allows us to have a very thoughtful and informed policy discussion internally about what OSEP's expectations would be. So we encourage you to keep those questions coming and be patient with you as we try to be very thoughtful in our response. Another question that has been coming in about indicator B6 is tied to the definition, is whether the definition of home includes babysitting. So as noted in the file specifications for the child count and ed environments data, home refers to children who receive the majority of their special education and related services in the principal residence of the child's family or caregivers. And as noted in the definitions, the term caregiver includes babysitters. We've also linked to the file specs and data documentation here in the slide deck. So when that's posted, you will be able to access it. And finally, for indicators 9 and 10, currently the instructions for indicators 9 and 10, so currently on the new package that is posted, the instructions for indicator 9 and 10 require states to provide racial ethnic disproportionality data for all children ages 6 through 21 served under IDEA. So that's noted in the instructions column, which is that far right column. So we're going to make a technical edit to the instructions for indicators B9 and B10 to reflect that this racial ethnic data for all school-age children includes 5-year-old children in kindergarten. So we would expect to see those 5-year-olds in kindergarten be included in the data for B9 and B10. That question came up with the change to B5 and B6 to align with the 618 data collection, so including those 5-year-olds in kindergarten, and then also 5-year-olds in preschool, to make sure that in an effort to align with that collection under 5 and 6, we recognize that we have to make a technical edit to B9 and B10 to make sure that it's clear that we would expect you to include those 5-year-olds in kindergarten here. It's a little weedy one, but wanted to let you know that we recognize that we do have to make that technical edit. And with that, Blythe, you can go to the next slide, which is really our question slide. I believe we've probably gotten quite a number of questions in the chat, so it might take us a second to look through those and start responding. And I don't know if, Angela, if you've been having a chance to look as we've been going on, as I've been talking, if there are any that you feel we could respond to quickly now. I'm only now pulling them up.
So I have been responding to quite a few. Hopefully those responses are visible to the participants. And even more importantly, hopefully those responses are all correct. But I have tried to respond to the questions that I'm fairly confident about. I don't know if any of the responses provided thus far would benefit from additional discussion. I have not been able to work my way completely down the list of questions, but I did get a good number of them answered while you were still talking.
I don't necessarily see them in the chat, but that might be because I'm now looking, but I think
oh, maybe Blythe wants me to read them because I don't think they're okay.
Yes,
right.
You need to read them.
Yes, okay, here I go. All right. Are we going to take questions from the question box first before?
Yes, please. Let's do that.
Okay.
Let's
perfect.
answer the ones we can answer.
All right, here we go. So will the PowerPoint be made available to us after the call? Sherry, yes, the PowerPoint will be posted. Typically it takes a couple of days. I asked in my written response for Blythe to correct me if I was wrong in terms of the timeline, but I do believe it's usually a couple days, but yes, it will be posted and available.
You weren't wrong. It should be a couple days, and it's posted in the same place if you use the website to access the meeting information. And there should be communications about this as well through email.
Great. We got a question about whether or not the allowance for COVID would also apply in future years. And I think that clearly because we are currently and continue to be in a pandemic during the data year that you will be reporting on in 2022, that there will be a need for OSEP to provide guidance and additional instruction related to what information we would like states to include in that submission, but we're not prepared to provide specifics at this point. But clearly, because the data reporting period started during COVID, we would anticipate that there would be some kind of impact. Brad asked us to please spell out our acronyms, and so I thanked him for reminding us to do so. And I believe, Christine, when you were presenting, you said state identified measurable result instead of just saying SIMR. So great job.
That was because I did read that comment, so I can't take full credit for being intuitive. Thanks, Brad, for pointing that out.
There was a question just to clarify if states would be needing to upload both a template and the copy of their SSIP report. And so to clarify that, Stella, no, we consider the use of that template and the completion of that template to be the state's report and the state submission. So if you use the template, you would only be uploading that completed template for your report. However, if your state chooses not to use the template and uses some other format, you would upload that PDF or that Word document for the purposes of reporting on indicators B17 and C11. There is a question from Carolyn asking about the differences between the PDF version and the Word version of the SSIP template, and that there might be some functionality differences between the two. And Carolyn, I'm going to put a pin in that question until we can go back and talk to our team members who helped us develop those templates, just to see if they can help us provide an answer to that question. Another clarification, I believe, related to indicator B6C. The question is whether or not the target for 2025 should be greater or less than the FFY 2020 baseline. And I would refer back to one of the slides that Christine covered that states that OSEP would expect that the data generally would decrease over time and the final target would be lower than the baseline. But as she mentioned, we are having some continued discussions because there are some nuances to that that may need to be considered. So it's a should, you know, we would generally expect, but it's not necessarily an absolute or a must. Should I take a breath and see if there are other questions, or should I keep rolling?
I think you should keep rolling because the next two I see are pretty easy. We've already addressed those. So I like small.
All right. A clarifying question related to indicators B1 and B2 and the reference to children who have died in the denominator. And we recognized that error based on this question that has come in previously, and a technical edit will be made so that—
It's already been made, Angela.
It's already been made. It's already been made. So died has been removed.
The died has been removed, and on the version of the measurement table that's posted on the IDEA website, you will see that it is no longer there.
All right. If the state plans to change the SIMR, state and identified measurable result, in the 2022 submission, what are the suggestions related to setting baseline during COVID when things are crazy? I don't think it says crazy, but I can't like scroll down without going to the next box.
I think it says iffy. It says when data might be iffy. So you're close, crazy iffy.
Yeah, so no one has asked this yet, so I'm going to answer a little bit off the cuff. But you know, states have the opportunity to revise baseline at any point throughout the SPP APR 6-year cycle if there is justification provided around why the baseline data needs to be revised. And so, generally speaking, a justification that would indicate that better or more valid and reliable data became available would be a justification a state could provide around changing baseline. So I think that there would be a case for states who are setting baseline during a pandemic year that perhaps more valid and reliable data would become available in the future. Christine, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
No, I think, you know, when you started, I thought, oh, I should write this down because I guarantee we're going to say the same thing. And we just about did. So that's pretty impressive.
Very good. All those years of working together.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to keep going. We have time, which is great. I lost my place though. Okay, B6C, as there is no universal preschool home, is philosophically a typical setting. I don't know if that's just a statement or if there's actually a question.
You want to keep going and then maybe
If Alan wants to put more in the.
Yes.
Yes. Regarding babysitters, is this referring to children in babysitting care outside of the home, but not in a formal licensed childcare setting? I believe that we have addressed this either in something we're working on, Christine, or is it captured in the slide?
The slide just references the definitions within the child count and ed environments data documentation, and the language, I mean, I would have to pull it up. I think my personal preference would be, since we're getting a ton of questions about 6, and I know in our universal TA, like the stuff we have teed up to roll out next, 6 is coming up heavily. So I would like to be able to answer all of those in one fell swoop versus piecemealing it at this time, especially considering the nuances with 6. But as we're talking, I could try to pull up the definitions just to verify. Because while Angela and I are knee deep in data, we're not knee deep in every single collection. I know that that would surprise all of you. So sometimes we refer back to things to make sure that we're crystal clear before response.
Although, Christine, I might ask you to not go look for that so that you can cover this next question. It was on your slide to clarify the bullet related to the target of 95% for indicator C2.
Oh, sure.
Natural environments, right?
Yes, that is a natural environments one. And I'm not sure. So the slide, the bullet says specifically that if the FFY target, so it references if the end target of the new package, so the FFY 2025 target is at least 95%, we would accept that end target even if it did not show improvement over baseline. So let's say your baseline was 99%. And then you're saying your end target is 95%, because generally, we do not accept targets if they do not show improvement over baseline. In the case of natural environments, we have made the decision, the policy decision, to allow an end target to be less than baseline, because we do not want that target setting to drive a decision about a child's placement and service setting, sorry. I hope that that clarified it enough. If not, feel free to put something in the chat so I know.
There is a question clarifying whether or not there are requirements that the targets for FFY19 be above baseline. And yes, because FFY19 is the final target, the targets that states have already reported generally for FFY19 in last year's APR, they would have reported these targets. We would have only accepted them if they were above baseline, except in the circumstances that Christine has reviewed. So the answer is yes. The FFY19 targets are expected to be above baseline because it's the last year in the cycle, and except for those specific instances that Christine referenced. Our friend Mary Corey with the curveball here. Why is 95% allowed for C2, but not 5% for B6C?
Well, Mary, B6C is new, right? So like as it's written like that. So give us a moment to have some conversations about it and decide if we have to make a policy decision in a particular, in a particular direction. So, I know that you're going to continue to extend a little grace to us to keep those conversations going internally and send us all these great questions so we can be very informed as we tee up those decisions for senior leadership. So thanks, Mary.
Next question is, when will states be able to start entering the APR data online? We anticipate that the system will be open and available for states to enter data mid to end December. We are actively working. Actually, the members of the data team have been out of pocket all week this week, working with the contractor to do the user testing to make sure that the system is flawless when it opens for states later this month. So yes, please utilize the SPP APR templates to begin to organize your data and the information that you will be reporting so that you'll be ready to roll as soon as the system opens. The next question, how am I doing, Christine? Are there any hands?
I don't see any hands, so I think you can keep going. We have some time.
All right.
Oh wait, there's a hand. I just saw a hand.
All right.
But Blythe is gonna have to help me with whose hand it is. Oh wait, I think Alan Garland has his hand up. Fred Adora.
Yes. So if you do we want to switch to hands for a bit and then go back, or?
Sure.
All right, I can, Alan Garland has, I think, had a hand up longer. So Alan, I'm going to unmute you. You should be unmuted.
Thank you. My question is the one on B6C, and my issue is because of COVID, we have lost hundreds, if not thousands, of childcare centers, and it seems inappropriate to set targets on decreasing home placement at a time when we don't anticipate these to come back for years, if at all. I would ask that OSEP consider suspending setting targets for this particular one, at least until the next reporting period.
Thank you for that, Alan. Would you be comfortable putting that request in writing and just shooting it to us so that we have it and can make sure that we don't lose track of it?
Yeah, I've got it in the comments.
Okay.
Blythe, can you help us to make sure that we can export all of the questions to like sort of our email so we can make sure we don't lose anything as we are working on some of these?
Email everything to both of you guys after the meeting.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent point. And obviously, as we developed this package and, continued with decision rules around the data reporting that have been in place for years and years, we did not consider being in a pandemic. So we appreciate that you raising that for us so that we can take it back and have a discussion.
Alan, sorry, this is Christine. Would you mind if I had a follow-up question around what you just shared, if I shot you an email and asked you?
Sure.
I mean, on the spotlight, no pressure right in front of 400 people, Alan. But I'm just thinking about the statute as it's currently written and what is required in a submission, and without sort of like waivers, like what would make sense if we are bound by what's there. So just thinking through what might be a policy decision we could make, what's required for legal sufficiency and what we don't have wiggle room with, and what might make most sense for state. So if I have a follow-up, I just want to make sure you'd be willing to have me reach out, but I didn't give you much choice but to say yes in front of all these people. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to discuss this. This has been a passion of mine for years.
There's a question about whether or not states, oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if there were any other hands up, or are we going back to the questions?
There were hands up before, but I don't see any up anymore. So okay, we'll just look out for them.
Thank you, Blythe. A question about whether states can set a growth target for the SSIP, for example, a certain percentage growth per year. I believe we have allowed that.
I think so as
Is there
well.
anyone on the PATE team that would be able to shoot the former PATE team that would be able to shoot Christine or I a quick email to confirm? I believe we have allowed that, but we will definitely follow up, Mary, to give you a definite answer.
Yes, I also agree with you, Angela, that we've allowed that. I think we might have to think through and circle back with Mary about what that would look like in the reporting tool, because they're going to be reporting data in that. So that might have to be a conversation we work through what that would look like in the tool sooner rather than later, while we're doing requirements and stuff for the system. But thanks, Mary, for raising that.
Next question is, if states have some assessment data from school year 2019-20 before building closure and the assessment waiver, should the state report that data in the SIMR? That's a great question. I think it would depend. I mean, I think it would be the state's decision whether or not you include this data. I imagine that the data would not necessarily be complete. It may not be representative of the population where you implemented your improvement strategies. I think there are lots of things that you would want to consider before making the decision whether or not to include it. There would be no expectation from OSEP that you would include assessment data because the department has waived that requirement. But I think this would be a great conversation to have with your state lead and or one of our TA partners to figure out kind of what makes the most sense for your state. Christina, anything to add on that one?
No, I would just say I was thinking back to sort of my experience as a state lead with a state when they were not able to administer a statewide assessment. And while they didn't have that SIMR data, they did give, they accessed progress monitoring data, and they reported that in the narrative to sort of show the impact of the hurricanes and interrupted schooling, but then looking at how their activities once they were back in school might have had some effect. So it wasn't necessarily in that, you know, when you're reporting your percentage of the SIMR, but just thinking about how that is an additional data point that you could speak to outside of that. So I think to Angela's point, what's going to make the most sense for your stakeholders and how you're sharing and conveying information, how you're using the information to guide your work moving forward, et cetera, but not that it would be a requirement that you have to give it to us, because we do recognize that statewide assessments were waived. But if you think you could make certain, you can posit certain things as a result of this smaller data set, if it was in particular schools or buildings you were working in, you know, and that's good information, you're free to include it.
There is a question or a statement actually regarding the 95% target for the Part C family survey that historically OSEP accepted a final target of 95%, even if it was not above baseline. I'm thinking this may have been slightly before my time on the data team, because I'm not recalling this as a decision rule. But we can absolutely go back and see if we can find evidence of this policy decision. Do you recall this policy decision, Christine?
No, absolutely not. The only ones I'm aware of are that we referenced in the slide and that we talked to our Office of General Counsel about to make sure that our understanding of our policy decisions was consistent with how they may interpret or analyze submissions when we need their input on something. So no, I'm not aware of this specific thing, but we will investigate.
All right, I'm looking at the time. It's 4:56. Are there any hands up that we need to get to? If not, I'll take a couple more of these questions. And I think our game plan is that we will, there are a couple of things that we might do once we get the printout of these questions. We will either post responses, probably responses that are already available in other documents or other guidance that we've already provided with the PowerPoint. Other questions we have to take back and have discussions, and then another bucket of questions I think we can work to incorporate in our universal technical assistance that we hope to have out in the coming weeks.
Angela, this is Christine. I answered one question about where the measurement table was and a request to provide the URL. So I did put that in the chat. Hopefully everyone can see it.
There is a question, I think this is a good one perhaps to end our meeting with. There's a question about the logic model, theory of action, and action plan documents, which I imagine are in reference to some of the information that states include in indicator 17, B17 and C11 with their S submission. If you refer to the optional template, there are several prompts that ask whether or not the theory of action, which is the required element, logic models are not in the measurement table. But if the theory action has been revised, if there's been a revision to the theory of action, which of course, drives some of the SSIP work that a state would be doing, we would want that to be included and uploaded with the state's submission. If there is no change to the logic model or theory of action or other documents, there is no expectation that those documents be resubmitted in the upcoming April 1st submission. All right, do you want to take us home, Christine?
Oh, I'm taking us home. Wow. Or should I turn it over to Greg to take us home? Because he always has something
Greg could take us home.
humorous to say. Greg, take us home.
Well, first, I want to thank the two of you for doing such an outstanding job, not only with the presentation, but then fielding all these questions on the fly. Great answers. I thought you did a great job of kind of letting folks know what we can say, but also, using your discretion in terms of things that we probably need to discuss more and take back. But terrific job. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the folks who hung in there till the end of this long and somewhat complicated presentation. You gave us some really great questions to think about. Appreciate how far down in the work all of you are as you prepare for your FFY 2019 submission. Hope everybody stays well and has a happy holiday, and we'll be talking to you again in January. So with that, I believe we will end the call. Thanks again.
Thank you.